I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today because I am building a quadcopter. Yep, it's time for my Karearea build. That's a quadcopter frame, in case you didn't know. And it's a super interesting quadcopter frame with vertical arms, and you won't believe it. And there's a whole bunch of other really interesting gear on this, like the HGLRC V5 Pro and a new motor from ZMX, and my first BLHeli32 ESCs as well. Stay tuned. Let's start by looking at the gear that's going to go on this build, and we'll start with the HGLRC V5 Pro flight controller. And it is a flight controller, but it's also going to be the video transmitter for this build. Now, a video transmitter and flight controller in one is not so unusual. For example, there's the Moto Typhoon, which has a stackable board. That's one video transmitter. And there's also the Furious Passato, which is a stackable video transmitter that goes on top of the flight controller. But I think the HGLRC is one of the only ones I know. Well, there's the Siren FPV does it as well, that puts the video transmitter on the same board as the flight controller. And that is, well, it's both cool and also risky, because fitting all those electronics onto a single board, it's a real challenge for quality control. And in fact, my Siren FPV, sorry to the guys at Siren, they'll be sad when they hear this, it died on like the third flight. The video transmitter crapped out on like the third flight on that copter. And I have heard mixed things from people about HGLRC boards. I know a lot of people, and in fact, I bought some HGLRC boards and I gave them to my patrons and said, hey, just put these in a quadcopter, fly it, and tell me, 6 months from now, tell me if it's still flying. And they all had great results. They all said, no, it's all good. They're still going. This is the ZMX FinX30. FINX is the new line of motors that ZMX is putting out. And the FinX30 it's a weird size. It is a 2207.5. That's 22 millimeters in diameter and 7.5 millimeters tall. And I'll tell you, I've actually never flown a 2207 motor. All the big motors I've been flying have been 2306, 2305. They've been wider, but not taller. So it'll be really interesting to see how this taller motor compares to the wider. I have most of my experience with like 2206 and 2205 sized motors. It'll be real interesting to see how this compares. The interesting thing about this motor is that it was designed to hit the same weight that the original ZMX V3 did, and that was, I believe, a 2206 motor. So what we've got here essentially is a 2207.5 motor with the same weight as a 2206, and that's just like getting more power for free, right? I will point out it's an open bottom design. I talked about the open bottom design in my review of the Rotor Riot Hype Train and the rifle motors, and I essentially concluded that I'm a fan of the open bottom design. I don't believe it presents additional risk of damage to the motors, and it makes them lighter. The one thing that I am still trying to figure out is, I've heard some people say that they have increased problems with breaking off the end of the arm right at the bolt holes with the open bottom motors, because instead of having a circular base to sort of spread the force out, it's focused on this sort of focal point. Focused on the focal point? Yeah. Right here. And in fact, I've seen that kind of break happen myself. It was a pretty hard crash. It wasn't me, it was another guy who was flying with me. And it was a pretty hard crash on concrete, and we said at the time, well, really nothing would have survived that hit. But you can see how this design would sort of focus the force. And maybe we need to be thinking about that when we design frames, giving just a little bit more carbon there. I don't know. The ESC is going to be the Wraith32 bit, and these are the 35 amp version. These were supplied by FPV303, by the way. These are the 35 amp version, which I have here just so you can see the cool logo. But actually, I'm going to be using the 20 amp micro version, and the reason for that is that the arms on the Talon, the Karearea Talon, is really designed for use with a 4-in-1 ESC. And the only reason I'm not using one is I just don't happen to have one right now. And I have these ESCs sitting around, and I thought, well, gosh, I may as well use them. These micro ESCs are supposed to be rated for 25 amps. I know, right? They're so small. Like, this is a 35 amp ESC here. This is a 25 amp ESC. We're going to find out. If they melt, well, then I'll I'll get a 4-in-1 and put it on there. But this is the one we're going to try to use because it's the one that's small enough to fit on the arms of the Karearea. And I know you guys who are big Karearea fans, I really ought to be using a 4-in-1. I know it's heresy what I'm doing here, but it'll be okay. And then we come to the frame, and the Karearea Talon is a fascinating frame. It's got vertical arms, and it's not the only vertical arm frame out there. I recently looked at the Quad Racer Zero, which also has vertical arms. But I complained about the Quad Racer Zero being such a tight freaking build. It's really a micro racer, ultralight, and sometimes I just don't want to hassle with that. The Karearea Talon is also a racing build, with vertical arms for improved aerodynamics, but it's got a little more room to stretch out in, and I think I'm going to like it a little bit better. Obviously, you can't talk about how good this frame is without flying it. The aerodynamics are part of its selling point, and so I won't be doing a full review of it. I'll just be doing a build. But if you look on Kareerea's website, you can see wind tunnel testing they did with smoke and stuff, and showing just how much drag and turbulence there is off of a traditional flat arm, and so very interesting to see if this behaves noticeably differently in the air compared to the traditional aerodynamically awful quads that we're used to running. Another difference between the Quad Racer Zero and the Karearea Talon is that the Talon has aluminum parts. So this is 7075 aircraft aluminum, and that's obviously going to be a little bit more durable than the 3D printed parts on the Zero. I know the folks from Quad Racer said, oh yeah, no, they're plenty durable, and no, I'm sure they are, but I mean, obviously aluminum's going to be more durable than 3D printed plastic any day. We'll start by installing these motor mounts on the arms, and the motor mounts have one unthreaded side and one threaded side. So when you install them, make sure you put the threaded side where you're going to put the bolt through, or where you're not going to put the bolt through. And the other thing is, the instructions say that you definitely want to thread lock all of these, and I'm oftentimes a thread lock heretic. There we go. I'm oftentimes a thread lock heretic and don't bother. But in this case, I think I'm going to take their suggestion. I'm going to get out my Mercury Adhesives thread locker, the only thread locker that has a brush in the cap. Oh, that I made that funny commercial about. And we'll go ahead and use it. Good. The instructions are very clear. They say to make sure that you're putting the motor mount on right with the threads facing the right direction. I'm not sure why it matters what direction the screw goes through in, other than, I guess, for aesthetics. The tolerances are quite tight, and getting the holes to line up is a little challenging. You can see there it should go through, but it sure looks like it's solid. Maybe if I just screw it in a little, it'll work itself out. No. Oh well. The tolerances here aren't perfect. Some of these motor mounts are looser than others. I don't really feel too critical of that because, I mean, I don't know. I mean, what's reasonable to expect? a few thousandths, right? But that last one was pretty tight, pretty snug, and this one is a little bit looser. And in fact, the instructions say that if you run into trouble, then use some cellulose tape to take up the, if it's loose, use some cellulose tape to tighten it up, or if it's tight, use just like a little plastic mallet to hammer it into place. If you compare this to the Armatan Chameleon, I've built several of those, and the tolerances on it are just dead freaking on every time. The aluminum just fits perfectly every time. And again, I'm not sure how much is reasonable to expect, to be honest. I've never been involved in this kind of manufacturing. It's not a problem. It's not really even a criticism. Once you get the screws on, it'll be nice and tight. If it's a little snug or a little loose, you know, it's not the end of the world. I just got to find things to comment on while I'm building, so there you go. Okay, now we've got 4 of the arms built. Let's set those aside. Now I got in my box 2 sets of side plates. It looks like one is a little taller than the other. Yeah. So I'm gonna, yeah, I can see the camera lines up perfectly. One is just a little taller than the other and has a little more up tilt. It looks like this one is going to give you a little more room maybe to work with a taller stack. And also is going to give, if you mount a high-def camera on top, a little less up tilt to the high-def camera. Since we're not going to have a tall stack, and hopefully we'll be racing fast, I'm going to go ahead and put this one on, which is the lower profile one. Now the screws that we used on the arms were the longest ones that come with the build. They're 10 millimeters. For this part, we're going to be using the second longest one, which are the 8 millimeter ones. I would normally not Loctite this kind of standoff, because I would need to take it apart for maintenance. But one of the beauties of the Karearea frame, or the Talon frame, is that the top sort of lifts up and slides out of the way with a hinge, and so you don't actually need to disassemble it so much in order to get at everything you need to get at. And now we can install the camera. The camera that I'm going to use is it's a Foxeer XAT600. It doesn't have the additional locking screw to set the angle like some of the run cams do. I'm using this camera just because I happen to have one. The other cameras that I have are either micro cameras, they won't fit easily, or they are they're Eagle, Foxeer Eagle, or Runcam Eagle, and the latency seems too high to put on a tight, racing build like this. So what I want to do is just use one of these rubber O-rings, and if you really squeeze it on there, it'll hold the angle pretty well. You got the O-ring in there, and once it goes together, it'll hold the angle pretty well, honestly. There's two screw holes here, a front one and a back one. And I guess that's, I mean, to figure out where to align your camera, I don't really know. But make sure you use the same one on both sides. The screws that I used for the camera are little 2mm screws that actually come with run cams. I'm a big fan of them because they take an M2 hex driver instead of a Phillips, and they're way easier to tighten down. It's just luck that they fit the Foxeer threads as well, but they're just way better than the little tiny Phillips head screws that come with most of the Foxeer, well, this camera anyway. I'm just checking to make sure I didn't put it in upside down. And you can see now that with those O-rings in there, it holds. Well, you can't tell how hard I'm pushing it, but it holds pretty well. And once you've got the angle set, you certainly could choose to put a spacer of, just stack up some foam tape and put it in here and use a zip tie to hold the angle. But for many people, this is going to be more than sufficient. And I've already screwed up here by failing to install the top piece here. This piece goes in here. And then re-Loctite that. Now we're going to take these captive nuts and we're going to insert them like so from the inside. This one at least doesn't want to go in. They often have a lot of friction to hold them in place when they're finally installed. And I think what I'm going to do is just make sure I've got this correct. I don't think these pieces are any different. Are they different from each other? They look identical. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to insert that screw there, and then, well, that's clearly the wrong screw. That's an 8mm screw. Should I be using a... I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick the screw through and install the captive nut. That may still be too long. Is there a shorter one that'll work? Here's the shorter one. No, that'll work fine. That'll work fine because although the thread doesn't stick out much there, that screw's going to actually be correct, I think, because although the thread doesn't stick out much there, the captive nut is going to actually extend the threads down inside the carbon. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get in the captive nut in the hole. It will usually require some squeezing, maybe some vice grips or something, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the screw itself to pull the captive nut down into the hole. And then the captive nut will be securely retained, and I can back the screw out again and Loctite it when the time comes. Yep. I do think that's the best way to do that. It's oftentimes difficult to get the captive nuts down into the carbon. Just make sure that the captive nut is lined up correctly and that it's actually going down inside the hole that it's supposed to go into and not binding against the carbon or something. Bingo. Now those captive nuts are installed and they're not going anywhere. We're going to leave this loose. We're not going to tighten that up just yet. We'll do the same thing on the front. I'll just put the piece in place. Yep, that's correct. It's a little hard to do this with the camera in the way. I mean this camera, not the camera that I'm shooting with. There we go. There we go. And I didn't have it lined up quite right at first. It was kind of going crooked, and the captive nut was not going in correctly. And we'll loosen these up. We want to leave these loose so that we can get the arms installed correctly. So that one's got a little tension just because I put that, probably could, really? That's got a little tension probably because I put the O-rings on the camera plate, so that's spreading and pushing on the camera plate a little bit, and but it'll be fine. So now we've got this top piece and set up, but these pieces are loose. This is the plate where your mounting stack is going to go, and it sits in these little indentations here, just like so. It's really clever, actually. That's really clever. So when it's all put together, they'll just sort of press on there and hold it in place. I'm going to assume that it's secure and it works well. It seems like it could, if the tolerances weren't, there we go. If the tolerances weren't good, it could just fall right out. The instructions show mounting the flight controller on here before completing the assembly, but I'm just going to keep going like this. You know, I can always open it up back up again later if I need to. These side pieces also have slits cut here for the carbon. And the instructions say if the tolerance is not right, then add a little bit of tape or something, which is not encouraging. Oh, this is going to be a little weird. I see where we're going here. It's going to be, okay, I think, all right, hang on. So you can see that this screw is a through hole, and this screw is not a through hole. So you got to put the screws through from the right direction, which means, I guess, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this piece on first. Stick the screw through, and then get the screw started here. Yeah. And again, you're going to leave this loose. And this part is, well, to be honest, it's a little annoying because you're going to need to take every single one of these back out and Loctite them after it's all together, which is a little freaking annoying. But hey, what price greatness. The other thing I can see is I'm going to need to get that flight controller stack plate installed before I button this all up, or it won't go in. So it's a little bit of a puzzle. I'm going to see if the right way to do it is to get one or two arms installed and then kind of try to slide it in, but It doesn't exactly slide in because the cutouts are not all the way through. Yeah. Wow. I'm sure there's a trick to this that I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that after you've built 1,000 of them, well, probably not 1,000, a lot of them, that this is easy, but let's see if I just loosen these all the way up. Will it have enough play to get that stuck in? I'm not sure how the best way to do it is. Oh, here we go. Just checking now to make sure that this piece appears symmetrical and I'm not putting it in upside down or backwards, but I don't think I am. And yeah, that I think is gonna work. If I just loosen those screws all the way out, it still holds together, but it'll go in. And now it's, yeah. Oh, I'm happy with that. Really, maybe don't loosen them quite that much. So the next thing to do is to put it on a flat surface and sort of level it. So you could get into a situation where the arms are kind of wonky and you want to put it on a flat surface. And then, I mean, am I now going to back the bolts out? Oh, dang. Am I now going to back the nuts out and, or screws out and Loctite them? And I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. I guess I'm just going to do it like this. With it flat, I'm going to tighten it down and Loctite it. I'm not sure why we're doing this, because if the screw holes are all aligned correctly, how could it not be square? I don't know. But I follow the instructions as told. Now you're not done yet, because we also need to install the torsion bars here. This frame as it is, and this is a problem that is common to all vertical arm frames. The designer has to solve this problem. Carbon is weak in this direction, and it's going to have problems with vibration. You can see that even good stiff carbon, it can have problems with vibration and resonance. So the way that Karearea have solved that is with these torsion bars. And the torsion bars are going to install like so. It's really nice how they've put them in here. I'll show you close up. It just kind of fits right in here, snaps in underneath the motor mount, and then when the motor screws go in, they hold it in place. There's also a slot here for a zip tie, but the instructions that I'm looking at from the website say don't need it. But obviously these will not be finally sort of in place until we install the motors. And there we go. We have put the frame together. It's a really fascinating frame. It feels really nice and solid in my hands. We're going to weigh it in a second. I really dig what they've done here, that you can just take these screws out and this part just lifts up for maintenance. In fact, we're gonna do that. We can even take the whole thing off if we desire. I like frames that open up for easy maintenance. I like that these horns here are designed to protect the camera, and unlike many things that ostensibly protect the camera, you can see that they're designed for when the quad is in forward flight. So as you go into forward flight, you see right here, if you were to smash into a wall like this, then the camera would be exposed. But in fact, you're never going to smash into a wall like that because, well, I mean, maybe if you were flying and you pitched back suddenly, but usually when you crash, you're going to be in forward flight, and that's where they're going to provide protection to the camera. So really thinking, you guys who design frames that protect the camera, good for you. You guys who design frames that don't protect the camera, I don't like it. But when you design a frame that protects the camera, remember the quad is going to impact pitched forward quite a lot of the time, and many of the designs that try to protect the camera don't take that into account. Let's see what it weighs in this trim. In this trim, we've got 115 grams. Now 115 grams is definitely not ultralight in terms of racing. We see the lightest race quads I'm aware of, the lightest race frames I'm aware of, are in the range of 60 grams-ish, 60-something grams. A more common lightweight frame might be 80 to 90 grams. That's actually not that hard to achieve. So at 117 grams, this is a little bit of a heavy frame. Well, it's saying something that we're in a world where we could call a 117 gram frame heavy, but it's heavier than many race frames, and it is designed as a purebred race frame. And the reason it's heavier is, I think, because of the aluminum parts. I mean, there's no question that that's adding a lot of weight. But, number one, it looks awesome. Okay, let's just give it that. And the aluminum parts are certainly adding strength, strength to the carbon, reinforcing it. And you just couldn't accomplish this type of joinery with pure carbon. I'm trying to think of other frames out there. The very first vertical arm frame actually was I think it was the Stig, wasn't it? That's the first one I can think of that really made ripples. And the Stig actually, does it have metal parts as well? I think it does. It's got those right angles, right? So there's very few people doing a pure carbon vertical arm frame, although the Quad Racer Zero comes to mind. And the weight that we've got here hopefully is balanced out by durability. The Karearea sells itself a lot on durability. We'll see how true that is. Obviously, me just crashing it isn't going to tell you the whole story, but a lot of people who fly it say it's quite durable. Yeah, that is going to do it, though, for this build. We've assembled the frame, and I know a lot of times these days I do builds where it's, 45 minutes of me building, but we're going to go back to the old way of doing it because, yeah, I'm working a lot on this website that you saw in one of my earlier videos, and that's what I was doing a lot of today. So we're going to do a multi-part here, and we're going to call this one part 1. In part 2, we'll assemble the electronics, and we'll get the rest of it put together and get it set up. Thanks for watching, and happy flying.